Hello, I'm Brad from Make It, and today I'll be showing you how to build a simple set of cornhole boards. The build material for this project is two 2-foot by 4-foot half-inch sanded plywood, 3 8-foot long quality boards. These are a bit more expensive, but they come already planed, they have nice clean edges, and will save you some time during the sanding process. For the legs of the cornhole boards, I used one 2x4. You will also need 2 bolts with nuts and washers and whatever paint you would like to use. I will leave all the materials I used down in the description below. The power tools I use for this project is my drill and jigsaw. Before making any cuts, you always want to measure your material because usually they are never the exact size they tell you it is in the store. When I measured my plywood sheet, I noticed it was a 1/4 inch short on the long side. On a positive note, the 8-foot long boards were a bit longer than the 8 feet, which allows me to cut 2 4-foot sections plus the thickness of my blade. I went ahead and made my cuts on the boards using my jigsaw and a square. However, for the thicker boards like these, I didn't think it was necessary to use a square. For assembling the sides of my box, I'm not using any fancy joinery. I'm drilling holes directly into the side, countersinking the holes so I don't split my wood, and then drove in 2.5 inch screws to attach the sides. Any hole that I make, I will fill with wood filler later on. My box isn't completely square, which is fine because it will straighten itself once I attach the top plywood sheet. I attached the plywood sheet from the top and tried to get it as flush to the side boards as possible. The more flush I can get my sides, the less sanding I will need to do later on. For the hole, I placed a mark 9 inches from the top of the board and 12 inches from the side. I set my compass to mark a 6-inch circle. I could then use my jigsaw to cut out my circle. I tried to stay on my line as close as possible. I then went ahead and filled all my holes and any other imperfections found in plywood end grain with wood filler. While the wood filler was drying, I grabbed my 2x4 and cut out 15-inch long sections for the legs. I then found my center point on the boards, which was 1 3/4 inches from the top to bottom, and set that point 2 inches from the back of the board. I drilled my hole, which was the same diameter of my bolt. I could then place my leg where I wanted it to be located on the board. I inserted the bolt into the hole I just made and tapped it with a hammer. This left a mark on the leg which showed me where I needed to drill my hole. Next, I rounded off the end of my legs with my jigsaw so it can swivel in and out. This doesn't need to be perfect because nobody will see it. You just don't want the back side of the leg to rub against the board as it's going in and out of the board. The height of cornhole boards need to be 12 inches. So I propped up my boards using whatever I could find to get my boards at the right height. I could then have the leg of the boards hanging off my table, which allowed me to mark where I needed to cut my legs. Now that the boards were built, it was time for sanding everything down. This was definitely the most time-consuming process. As I mentioned earlier, this process is much easier when you take the time to get your boards flush with each other as you're screwing everything together. I started off using 60 grit sandpaper and then moved on my way up to 150 and then finally 220 grit sandpaper. With the sanding complete, it was time to start adding some color to these boards. I went over everything with a white coat of paint for my base. Now, I wanted to customize these boards to my own personal preferences, but I didn't want to spend a ton of money on vinyl stickers, and I don't have a logo maker like a Cricut. I definitely didn't want to freehand something because, well, I'm terrible at that. So I came up with a simple solution using the things that I already had in my house. I started off by taking a sheet of wax paper and covering it with painter's tape. I then cut out my letters that I printed right off Microsoft Word. I used spray adhesive to attach my letters to the painter's tape. This allowed me to use scissors to cut out my letters and basically make a giant sticker. With the letters cut out, I could then remove the wax paper from the painter's tape and stick my letters to my board. I will be adding strips to my board, so I'm painting the base color for that now. Once I had a chance to dry, I could then lay my painter's tape down. I also wanted to leave a white triangle that leads up to the hole. So I found my center point at the bottom part of the hole and placed painter's tape from the center point all the way to each corner. I used an X-Acto knife to get a nice clean point at the top. Here you can lightly score the painter's tape and remove the excess, but be careful not to cut the wood. I then blocked off the remaining white section with newspaper before spraying the main color of my boards. I ended up putting a total of 2 coats on. When the paint dried, it was time for the moment of truth. I could start removing my painter's tape. I gotta say I'm very happy with how this turned out, and I'm glad I could get these results using the stuff that I already had. I would love to hear your comments on this decal method, or do you have any other DIY methods on how you make your custom designs? Go ahead and leave a comment below so we can all learn from them. I moved on to using the same process for my logo on the board, which I used my YouTube logo. I printed off the logo from my computer. This time I can't start cutting into the wax paper from the ends because I will need to use the entire sheet for the circle part of the logo. Now, my YouTube logo isn't too hard to replicate, so I wanted to try using this process using a more challenging logo and see if it works. I printed off a logo from my favorite baseball team, the Brewers. The logo would be too small on just one sheet of paper, so I printed it off on 4 sheets of paper and glued it to the top of the painter's tape. I could then cut out each section of the logo based off the color it is. Again, I will be using the entire section of painter's tape, so I don't want to start my cut from the outside. These boards are my own personal use, and I'm really just experimenting with the design process, so I'm completely okay with my boards not matching. Once everything was cut out, I could then place the outline of the logo down onto the board. Since I already had a white base, I went ahead and attached the white sections down onto the board. I masked everything off and painted the first layer of color. When that had a chance to dry, I could then add the pieces that matched that color. Again, I masked everything off so the next color couldn't get through the cracks. Keep in mind, every logo will be different, and you just have to map out each color in the best order to apply them. With the paint dry, I could then remove the painter's tape. I thought it turned out pretty good, but you could see in some areas where the painter's tape wasn't completely down flat. So I took a small paintbrush and quickly touched up those areas, which fixed the problem. To protect the boards, I used Total Boat Clear Gloss Varnish. I used this varnish because it's considered an exterior and interior varnish, and it's easy to use. I can recoat within an hour, and I don't need to sand between coats. Finally, I attached the legs using bolts and washers. I used nylon nuts to prevent them from unscrewing. Now, you can certainly make your own set of bags, but the quickest and easiest way to get your bags is by purchasing them. I bought my bags on Amazon for around $20, and they're regulation size bags. I'll leave a link in the description below of the bags I purchased, which also gives you the option to pick whatever color combination you want that will fit your color scheme on your cornhole boards. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.